You're standing in front of a crowd. Maybe it's a conference, maybe it's a Zoom call. Your mouth goes dry, your heart races. You know what you want to say, but your mind betrays you. You freeze. Why does this happen? Why is it that we can rehearse for hours and still fall apart when it matters most? Here's a thought that might change everything. What if the fear isn't really about speaking at all, but about being seen, about being judged, about being rejected? The real battle isn't happening out there, it's happening inside your mind. According to Epictetus, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. This is where Stoicism offers something revolutionary. While most people try to get rid of fear, Stoics teach us to train it, to reshape it, to see it not as an enemy, but as raw material, a forge for building courage, clarity, and confidence. You don't need to be born brave to act with bravery. You build it. With daily practice, with sharp awareness, with a philosophy that was designed to be lived, not just studied. Pierre Hadot, the French philosopher who redefined ancient philosophy as a way of life, once explained, "For the ancients, philosophy was a spiritual exercise, a way of becoming fully alive and fully awake." And what is public speaking, if not a spiritual battlefield? It's where we confront our deepest fears, the fear of being misunderstood, dismissed, or simply not good enough. But here's the first Stoic secret. You can't control how others react. You can only control how you show up. That's where real power begins. According to Heraclitus, whose ideas deeply influenced Stoic thought, no man ever steps in the same river twice. Everything flows. That includes fear. It's not fixed, it's not permanent, and because of that, it can be transformed. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse, the place where ancient wisdom meets modern chaos. Here, Stoicism isn't just theory. It's your armor, it's your compass, it's the calm eye in life's storm. As Ryan Holiday, one of today's most influential voices in modern Stoicism, says, most people run from discomfort. Stoics train for it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. In this video, you'll learn how the greatest minds, from Marcus Aurelius to Massimo Pigliucci, would face the fear of public speaking. You'll walk away with actionable Stoic tools, mental exercises, a new framework for turning anxiety into confidence. If this topic already has you thinking, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps spread this message and keeps the legacy of Stoicism alive for the modern world. Are you ready to master fear with the power of reason? Then let's begin. Number 1. What is the fear of public speaking really about? When we talk about the fear of public speaking, we often treat it like a technical issue. You just need more practice. It's just stage fright. You're just shy. But the truth runs much deeper. The fear of speaking in public isn't about forgetting your lines. It's not even about the audience. It's about something far more personal, far more primal, the fear of not being accepted. At its core, what we fear is the loss of belonging. We're afraid of looking foolish, of making mistakes while others watch, of hearing silence when we expected applause. But Stoicism teaches us to look beneath the surface of emotions, not to avoid them, but to expose them. And when we examine this fear closely, what we really find is a desperate attempt to control something that was never ours to command, how others perceive us. According to Seneca, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This is a hard truth, because it means that most of the stress we experience before speaking, the nervous rehearsals, the racing thoughts, the catastrophizing, isn't caused by the speech itself. It's caused by our mental projection of a disaster that doesn't even exist yet, a fantasy of failure that we create in vivid detail. Baruch Spinoza, the rationalist philosopher heavily influenced by Stoic logic, once observed, "The emotion that arises from imagination is more powerful than that which comes from reason." What does this tell us? That the monsters we face on stage aren't real. They're constructed in our minds, fed by a lack of awareness and training. Stoicism flips this script. It says, tame your imagination with reason. Sharpen your inner focus until no external reaction can shake you. According to Musonius Rufus, you must train yourself to endure the gaze and the words of others with calmness. Fear of public speaking is not weakness, it's misdirected attention. When we worry about approval, we give our power away. When we focus on controlling perception, we lose control of ourselves. The Stoics remind us, freedom begins the moment we bring our attention inward. Socrates, the philosophical godfather of Stoicism, gave humanity a timeless invitation: know thyself. This is where transformation begins. When you understand your own values, your voice becomes anchored. You realize that your worth doesn't hang in the balance of a stranger's opinion. And in that moment, the stage is no longer a trap. It becomes a platform, not to prove yourself, but to serve others with clarity, humility, and courage. Number 2, how the Stoics saw fear. Fear has always haunted human beings. It's older than language, older than civilization. But while most traditions treat fear as something to suppress or avoid, Stoicism approaches it differently. For the Stoics, fear isn't a personal flaw or weakness. It's a symptom, a signal that our perception is distorted, not a villain to defeat, but a messenger to understand. Seneca wrote with piercing clarity, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." To the Stoics, this was more than poetic wisdom. It was a daily reminder. Fear doesn't come from the world outside. It comes from the weight we place on the things we can't control. We fear public speaking not because the stage is dangerous, but because we've overvalued the audience's opinion. We've tied our self-worth to their reaction. Chrysippus, one of the key architects of Stoic logic, taught that emotional suffering is the result of mistaken judgments. If we believe that applause means we're worthy and silence means we've failed, we've handed over our identity to strangers. Musonius Rufus drove this point home with ruthless simplicity. The truly free man is the one who disregards reputation and acts with integrity even when mocked. And how often do we let the imagined mockery of others silence our truth? Fear keeps us small, not because it's powerful, but because we give it authority. The Stoics were not fearless, they were trained. They endured discomfort on purpose, not to impress, but to liberate themselves from the prison of public approval. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by political enemies and the chaos of empire, still returned to this simple truth. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And that's what fear reveals, whether we've anchored our identity to something stable or to shadows. Heraclitus, whose ideas deeply shaped Stoic foundations, once reflected, "Adversity reveals a man to himself." In other words, fear is not the enemy. It's the mirror. It shows us where our foundations are weak. And when we look into that mirror with the clarity of reason, we see an opportunity, not to avoid fear, but to walk through it. William B. Irvine, one of today's most insightful interpreters of Stoicism, explains that when we confront the worst-case scenario and train for it, fear begins to lose its teeth. It's not about expecting the worst. It's about being ready for it. And when you're prepared to lose approval, you're no longer a slave to it. Baruch Spinoza offered the final piece of this insight. Understanding is the beginning of emotional freedom. And that's what Stoicism teaches us, not to be fearless, but to understand fear so well, so deeply, that it no longer commands us. It becomes what it always was, a shadow, cast by a light that we now choose to hold. Number 3, the power of negative visualization. Picture this. You step onto the stage. The lights hit your eyes. Dozens, maybe hundreds of people are watching. You open your mouth and forget your first line. Someone in the front row checks their phone. You feel your chest tighten, your hands tremble. For most people, this would be a nightmare. But for a Stoic, this is training. You've just entered the mental gym where courage is built. This isn't pessimism, it's preparation. According to Epictetus, train yourself to think of the worst-case scenarios, and you will not be surprised by them. This is the essence of a Stoic technique known as premeditatio malorum, or in modern terms, negative visualization. It's not about expecting disaster. It's about rehearsing your emotional response before it's needed. It's a mental vaccine against panic. Instead of hoping for perfection, you become familiar with adversity. So when it arrives, you don't flinch, you perform. Seneca, one of the most respected Stoic minds, practiced this daily. He would visualize losing his wealth, his health, even his reputation, not to suffer in advance, but to inoculate himself against the emotional collapse that unprepared minds often experience. Seneca once wrote, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." This concept isn't stuck in ancient times. William B. Irvine, a leading voice in modern Stoicism, teaches this method as a cornerstone of resilience. In his words, negative visualization helps us cultivate gratitude and immunity at the same time. You appreciate what you have and train for what you might lose. Imagine doing this before your next presentation. You visualize the awkward silence, the missed slide, the confused faces, and then you breathe through it. You imagine yourself staying grounded, speaking anyway. Not perfectly, but purposefully. Chrysippus, the Stoic logician, believed that logic should serve the soul, not just win arguments. And this technique is a perfect example of applied logic. You're preparing your mind to meet chaos with clarity. Ryan Holiday echoes this in today's world of constant pressure and visibility. Prepare for what lies ahead. Expect the blows, and they won't knock you down. This is a power few people ever develop. Most avoid discomfort at all costs. They visualize success only. But Stoics understand, true peace doesn't come from avoiding fear. It comes from mastering your response to it. Marcus Aurelius, facing war and plague and betrayal, still made time for this mental discipline. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. So rehearse failure, visualize it, embrace it, and you'll discover something remarkable. Once you've met the worst in your mind, the stage doesn't scare you anymore. It becomes what it truly is, a space to serve, not to survive. Number 4, internal control, the true source of courage. Let's be honest, the moment before you speak, when your name is called, your slides are ready, and the eyes of a room turn toward you, that moment can feel like standing on a ledge. It's not the words you fear, it's what they represent: exposure, vulnerability, judgment. And yet, in that very moment, something else is also possible. Something the Stoics mastered over centuries of disciplined thought and practice: the power of internal control. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, warrior, philosopher, lived under unimaginable pressure. But he still took the time to write reminders to himself, not to others, but to his own mind. You have control over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This is the core of Stoic resilience. When fear rises, most people look outward. What will they think? What if I mess up? What if I freeze? But the Stoic turns inward and asks a different question. What is mine to control right now? Epictetus, who started life in chains and ended as a revered teacher of freedom, built his entire philosophy around this insight. He didn't promise comfort or applause, he promised clarity. According to Epictetus, the chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. When we bring this to the stage, or any moment of exposure, It changes the game. You can't control how your voice sounds in their ears. You can't control if they nod, smile, or check their phone. But you can control your breath. You can control your pace, your focus, your tone, your intention. And that, the Stoics argue, is enough. Modern Stoic Massimo Pigliucci calls this practical freedom, the kind of freedom that isn't theoretical or abstract, but lived and tested in everyday moments. He writes that the moment you surrender the illusion of control over outcomes, you regain actual control over action. Freedom, Pigliucci explains, is recognizing the boundary between what's within your power and what's irrelevant to your moral purpose. The implications of this mindset go beyond speaking. They affect everything. Imagine being in a job interview and not trying to impress. Imagine entering a difficult conversation and not trying to manipulate the outcome. Imagine speaking on stage and not performing, but simply offering your truth. That shift from performance to presence is Stoic. Chrysippus, the great systematizer of Stoic logic, believed that emotional disturbances are caused by misjudgments. If you believe being liked is essential, then silence feels like rejection. But if you believe that honest effort aligned with virtue is enough, then even a cold audience becomes irrelevant. Because your standard isn't external approval, it's internal alignment. Ryan Holiday puts it into modern terms for today's audience. Courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing the thing anyway because it's the right thing to do. The Stoic doesn't aim for applause. The Stoic speaks because silence would betray their purpose. The Stoic doesn't fear failure. The Stoic fears wasting the opportunity to act with virtue. That's why this philosophy survives millennia, because it teaches us how to live from the inside, even when the outside feels overwhelming. When fear arises, the average person tries to control the world. The Stoic redirects control back to the only place it ever truly existed, within. Marcus Aurelius wrote this not for an audience but for himself, as emperor, surrounded by chaos. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Fear isn't the signal to stop. It's the invitation to focus. And when you focus on what you can control, the breath, the thought, the purpose, fear loses its grip. So the next time you step onto that stage, remember this. You don't need to command the room. You only need to command yourself. In a world of reaction, be the one who responds with reason. That's Stoic courage, quiet, grounded, unshakable. Number 5. The dichotomy of control in action. You're backstage, minutes from stepping into the spotlight. Your mind begins to spiral. What if I forget my lines? What if I sound nervous? What if they don't like me? This internal dialogue is familiar to anyone who's faced a moment of public exposure. But here's the truth. The Stoics understood better than anyone. The majority of our suffering doesn't come from events. It comes from our false belief that we can control them. According to Epictetus, some things are up to us, and some things are not. Freedom and happiness begin the moment we accept this. This is the dichotomy of control, and it may be the most powerful idea in the entire Stoic playbook. At first glance, it seems simple, but in practice, it's a psychological revolution. Think about public speaking. What's actually under your control? You can prepare your message. You can breathe with intention. You can choose to stand tall, to speak clearly, to focus your mind on contribution rather than approval. That's your domain. That's your ground. Now think about what's not under your control. The audience's reaction, the room temperature, a tech failure, someone sneezing during your opening. The fact that a few people in the back are scrolling on their phones instead of listening. Trying to control these things is like trying to hold back the tide. You waste energy, you lose focus, and worst of all, you become disconnected from your own power. Marcus Aurelius, constantly tested by the chaos of empire, reminded himself daily, Adapt yourself to the life you have been given and truly love the people with whom destiny has surrounded you. It's not fatalism, it's alignment. The Stoics didn't teach passivity, they taught precision. Don't waste strength where it doesn't matter, focus where it does. Modern Stoic thinker Ryan Holiday builds on this when he writes, "Focus on the effort, not the outcome. Do your job, let the rest go." That's how a Stoic walks into the spotlight, not expecting control, but choosing clarity. William B. Irvine, in his book, A Guide to the Good Life, explains how the dichotomy of control is the key to living with peace in a chaotic world. He suggests dividing your thoughts before any challenge into two columns. What can I influence? What must I accept? Then act on the first and let go of the second. This mindset transforms the speaking experience. If someone misunderstands you, that's not your fault. If someone doesn't agree, that's their freedom. If the mic cuts out, you improvise. Why? Because you didn't come to impress. You came to offer something. And that offering, your presence, your ideas, your service, is 100% within your control. Musonius Rufus, known for his uncompromising discipline, said, "Moral excellence begins with choosing what we allow to affect us." So when you step into public view, remember, your peace does not depend on applause. Your dignity isn't tied to external perfection. You are not your audience's reaction. You are your preparation, your values, your effort. And that's why the dichotomy of control isn't just a concept. It's a shield, a compass, a way to walk through life without being yanked around by every opinion, every possibility, every unexpected twist. In the Stoic view, control isn't about dominating outcomes. It's about dominating your attention. And when your attention is rooted in what's yours to command, your courage, your clarity, your voice, then even if the world shakes, you won't. You'll be steady, like a lighthouse in a storm. Number 6, the art of practicing like a Stoic. So, you've prepared your slides, you've rehearsed your lines, maybe you've even memorized your opener down to the syllable. And yet, the fear is still there. Why? Because most people practice performance. But the Stoics, they practiced preparation of the soul. They didn't just rehearse what to say, they rehearsed who they needed to be when it was time to say it. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher who mentored emperors and survived betrayal, had a clear belief. The man who is prepared carries within himself the strength to meet anything that may come. For the Stoic, preparation isn't just about content. It's about character. It's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual. That's why rehearsing like a Stoic isn't a matter of perfecting your pitch. It's a ritual of internal fortification, a training ground for equanimity. Think of Chrysippus, architect of Stoic logic. He believed training the mind was like conditioning the body. You don't wait for the battle to sharpen your sword. You sharpen it daily, especially when things are calm. Because storms always come, and the unprepared always drown. This ancient wisdom echoes powerfully in modern voices. Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL commander and leadership strategist, lives by a similar principle. Discipline equals freedom. He teaches that we don't rise to challenges, we fall to the level of our preparation. His philosophy is one of preemptive adversity. Seek the discomfort before it finds you. Train harder than necessary. Own everything, especially your mindset. In his words, there is no shortcut, there is no hack, there is only one way, so get after it. It's a mindset the Stoics would have admired deeply. Jocko doesn't teach resilience from theory. He teaches it from experience, and like the Stoics, he believes that the battlefield is internal, long before it's ever external. Ryan Holiday builds on this as well. The Romans trained like they were in real war, because they knew that in crisis, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. So how do we apply this when preparing to speak? It starts by changing the definition of practice. It's no longer about polish, it's about resilience. A Stoic rehearsal looks like this. You practice your content and your breath. You deliver your message and visualize tech failure. You rehearse with distractions and train to stay grounded. You speak alone in a quiet room and then again in a noisy one. You simulate discomfort not to make life harder, but to make your mind unshakable when it counts. Massimo Pigliucci encourages his students to take philosophy off the page and into action. For him, every presentation, every difficult conversation is a laboratory for practicing virtue. He writes that Stoicism isn't about pretending you're unaffected. It's about strengthening your responses until you're not undone by life's uncertainties. That's why the Stoic rehearsal includes more than just repetition. It includes exposure. You speak while standing in a cold room, while being interrupted, while forgetting a line on purpose. You simulate the mess. Because if you can remain steady in a storm you created, the real one won't shake you. This is how the Stoics approach preparation, as a full-body experience. Musonius Rufus went so far as to recommend physical hardship as part of moral training, because, as he taught, comfort makes the mind weak, and weakness doesn't serve you when the pressure is on. And here's the truth. Most people want the spotlight, but they don't want the preparation that makes the spotlight bearable. That's what sets Stoics and disciplined warriors like Jocko apart. They don't rehearse for applause. They rehearse for alignment, for readiness, for the inner stability that no critic, no silence, no stage can take away. According to Epictetus, first, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. So when you practice, don't just run through your lines. Practice being the kind of person who speaks with intention, who owns the room, not with ego, but with clarity, who can pause in silence, smile in discomfort, and speak not to impress, but to serve. Because on that stage, the real test isn't your voice, it's your presence. And that presence is forged in the quiet hours, when no one is watching, but everything is being built. Number 7. The Stoic pre-talk ritual. In the final minutes before stepping into the spotlight, something shifts. Your breathing gets shallow, your thoughts speed up, your senses sharpen. It feels like you're standing at the edge of something huge. And you are, but not just externally. What's happening inside you is far more important than what's waiting out there. And the Stoics understood this better than anyone. When it's time to act, your performance depends on how well you've prepared your mind. That's why the Stoics developed what we might call today a pre-action ritual, not superstitious, but strategic, not mystical, but mental. A sequence of practices that align your body, reason, and intention before you face challenge, pressure, or fear. This ritual has 3 essential parts: conscious breathing, rational clarity, and purpose-driven affirmation. First, conscious breathing. You stop, you close your eyes, you inhale deeply through the nose, you hold, you exhale slowly through the mouth, and you repeat. This isn't about calming down, it's about taking command. Baruch Spinoza, the rationalist deeply influenced by Stoic principles, wrote, "The mind and the body are not separate entities. They are one and the same thing, experienced in different ways. Your breath is a steering wheel. It reconnects your mind to the present moment. And in the present, fear has no foothold. In the present, there is only what must be done." Next, rational clarity. You ask yourself, what is under my control right now? Your tone? Yes. Your intention? Yes. Your presence? Absolutely. The audience's reaction? No. Their approval? Not even close. This is where Epictetus becomes your internal coach. Freedom and tranquility come from understanding what is and isn't within our control. By mentally reviewing this principle before you speak, you armor yourself against emotional hijack. You're no longer gambling with your peace. You've already decided where your effort belongs and where your surrender begins. Third, and perhaps most importantly, affirmation of purpose. You remind yourself, I'm not here to be perfect, I'm here to be present. I don't speak to impress. I speak to serve. I am not my fear. I am my preparation. These affirmations aren't mantras. They're contracts with your highest self. They're reminders of your reason for being here, in this moment, doing this thing. Ryan Holiday emphasizes this in his reflections on modern Stoicism. The fight is won long before it begins. The preparation is the victory. The moment simply reveals it. Marcus Aurelius, in one of his most powerful meditations, spoke directly to the heart of this moment. At every moment, keep a sturdy mind ready to meet anything that may come. This is what the Stoic pre-talk ritual creates. A sturdy mind, not a perfect plan, not an ego-driven performance, but a steady, inward state that can withstand any external reaction. Because let's face it, you can have the best slides, the best jokes, the best data, but if your mind is scattered, none of it matters. You'll crumble at the first sign of resistance. But if your mind is centered, if you've done the inner work, then it doesn't matter if the mic fails, if someone yawns in the front row, or if you stumble on your second sentence. You'll keep going, not because you feel confident, but because you're anchored in something deeper. As Heraclitus put it, the dry soul is the wisest. The dry soul is the one that isn't soaked in ego, fear, or the hunger for validation. It is calm, controlled, grounded. So before you step onto that stage, into that meeting, or into that moment where everything feels at stake, return to your ritual. Breathe with intention, clarify your control, affirm your purpose. Because courage doesn't begin with applause, it begins with awareness, and that's the kind of courage the world remembers. Now you understand. The fear of public speaking, that tight chest, that restless mind, that voice that says, "You're not ready." It's not the enemy, it's the mirror. It reflects your desire to be perfect, to be liked, to be in control of what can't be controlled. And the Stoics, from Epictetus to Marcus Aurelius, from Chrysippus to modern voices like Ryan Holiday and Jocko Willink, all reached the same conclusion. Freedom begins where illusion ends. You've learned that fear isn't created by the audience. It's created by the thoughts you attach to their judgment. You've seen how most anxiety is just the imagination running wild, and how Stoicism teaches us to calm that imagination with reason. You've practiced negative visualization, not to invite disaster, but to diffuse its surprise. You've redefined courage as acting with fear, not without it. According to Seneca, the greatest discovery of the human spirit is that it can improve itself every single day. That improvement doesn't happen by accident. It happens by decision, by recognizing where your power ends and begins, by rehearsing like a warrior of the mind, by anchoring yourself with purpose and letting go of everything else. Today you learn to recognize fear as a reflection, not a reality. Use Stoic techniques like negative visualization to train resilience. Shift focus from external control to internal mastery. Replace shallow performance with deep presence. Practice like a philosopher, not a perfectionist. Prepare the mind, body, and spirit with a pre-talk ritual that sharpens your will. And maybe most importantly, you learned that you don't need to conquer fear to speak powerfully. You need to walk beside it with clarity. According to Marcus Aurelius, the obstacle on the path becomes the path. Fear isn't in the way. Fear is the way. When approached through Stoic discipline, it becomes the very forge that sharpens your message, your presence, your strength. It's not something to avoid, it's something to work with. So here's your challenge. Don't just watch this video and move on. Apply one Stoic principle the next time you speak. Maybe it's a breath, maybe it's a mindset shift, maybe it's a single line you whisper to yourself before walking into the room. I don't speak to impress, I speak to serve. And when you do, let me know. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the Stoic insight that struck you the hardest today? Which technique will you use the next time you face fear in public? If this video brought you value, gave you clarity, or helped shift your mindset, give it a like so others can find it. Share it with someone who struggles with stage fright, self-doubt, or the weight of judgment. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Stoic Lighthouse, because here every video is a step toward inner strength. And before we go, a quick preview of our next episode: why the world's most powerful people make better decisions, and the forgotten Stoic technique behind it. If you've ever wondered why billionaires, elite performers, and military leaders seem to make faster, clearer, bolder decisions, the answer isn't just mindset. It's a specific ancient practice they often don't even realize they're using, and in our next video, we're going to uncover it. Until then, stand tall, speak with purpose, and remember, your fear isn't a flaw, it's your proving ground. See you in the next one.